Hello and happy Halloween, everyone. My name is Sheena Smith, and I'm the VP of Client Services here at Spend Matters. I'll be running things behind the scenes today, so if you have any technical questions, please submit them through the Q&A panel. We have a fun show for you today, all about how Alexa and Siri are taking over your lives and the whole world will someday be run by robots. Jokes aside, it's exciting to be at a place where finally software is actually working as we want it to, becoming more intuitive in a good way by the hour. So, some quick housekeeping before we jump in. If you'd like to learn more about our speakers, Pierre Mitchell and Paul Blake, their bios are there on the screen for you to read. And please feel free to connect with them on LinkedIn or reach out directly via email. You'll also notice a resource library full of useful goodies for you to download, including a white paper on the Internet of Things, a Spend Matters report on disruptive technology, and if you like what you hear around GEP's philosophy today, we do encourage you to sign up for a demo with their team. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A panel and we'll answer them during our session at the end of today's show. But with that, I'm going to hop directly in with Spend Matters Chief Research Officer, Pierre Mitchell. Hey, Pierre.
Hey, Sheena, and thanks everybody for attending. I'm really excited to be here for today's session. I think one of the great things, part of that is presenting with Paul, who's a great presenter and just chock full of info. So I think hopefully you guys will get some value out of today's session. Okay, so first thing I want to start with is to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in our daily lives, you know, from a consumer standpoint, and talk a little bit about how some of the innovations from the B2C side are coming over to the B2B side and what that means to procurement and how, you know, we can tap some of this goodness that's, you know, that's out there. So, you know, obviously whether you have, you know, an iPhone or you have using Android, you know, a Google, you know, class phone, it doesn't matter. You are already a user of tons of apps and online services that is hopefully making your life somewhat easier, but at the same time, I'm sure, you know, making it more complex as well. But the whole idea here on the consumer side is to really make things really easy and valuable for consumers so that they are really engaging and adopting the technology so that, you know, not only they can get value from the product, but by engaging them, you learn from them and you can thus serve, the providers will serve you up to their advertisers. So, you know, that is where, you know, the consumer or you are the product, not necessarily just the user of the product. And one of the things that's really important in that is making the process really kind of frictionless. And so you hear about a lot of the providers, you know, the Amazons and everyone, they talk about, we want to reduce friction. We want to get rid of the pain points, right? Which makes a lot of sense, right? So if you look at something like Quicken Loans or TurboTax, and I put up a lot of, you know, icons here. You know, one of the great things about, say, Quicken Loans or TurboTax is the system is very aware of all of the complex regulatory documents that sit underneath, and they shield all that from you, the end user, and make it as easy as it is on you to be able to kind of, you know, navigate through that process and make it easy. Or calling up and making reservations, right, at different restaurants. It's basically OpenTable is an API that lets you book capacity from a bunch of suppliers. That's a great idea, right? That is a supply chain use case, if you will. If you look at PayPal, right, it makes things very easy to go in and pay for things. So this idea of making it frictionless is key, and then the idea of engagement and making sure that when you're interacting with a system, it's something that is fairly self-evident as to how you need to do it. So this is like when you buy something from IKEA, you know, there's no massive instruction book, you know, with lots of words. You know, it's a lot of these blob guys showing you, you know, what to do to make it really easy. So it's really trying to eradicate that complexity and make it really engaging to you depending on who you are. So if you're a teenager, Snapchat's going to be more of an appropriate metaphor. If you're more of a professional, using, you know, LinkedIn, it's going to be tuned to your, you know, persona, if you will, no matter where you are, you know, in the world. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the notion of platforms and ecosystems is this idea of, you know, making things open and democratized to not just end users, but also folks who will then serve those end users and those consumers. So Mobile operating systems like Android and iOS, probably the best examples, to allow app providers to serve up great apps to, create a great experience for you. And those services that they serve up are not just, apps and games, but they also involve content. And the more in which these services can kind of provide outcomes, so think about Uber as an example, we'll talk about them in a second. It's not just the app functionality, it is really the fact that you get a car on demand to offer you a transportation outcome, right? And so as you move to everything as a service, so if you want to have a gig worker that's available, or you want to, release a new product on Kickstarter, or if you want to have a legal attorney, on demand, as well as maybe just some contract templates, on demand on the consumer side, great. You've got LegalZoom. That same kind of thing is happening and coming over to the B2B side, and increasingly it's not just via smartphone, it's tying into all of the things in our daily lives. And so in the consumer world, it's hooking up to an Uber car or a Tesla, and those systems are great, but what's really making those systems more and more powerful and relevant, and so Google always talks about relevancy of the search, is artificial intelligence. So Tesla basically has all these cameras. They are learning systems that are learning basically how to help you improve how you drive. And it's also, the same thing is going to be happening with Uber and Google and others. So the machine, if you will, all these devices that are out there are increasingly learning, and they're learning from you. And the more in which they learn from you, the more in which they can help tailor services for you to, to make things more relevant and valuable to you. And the key thing is to know is it works, right? If you look at the top 5 U.S. companies based on market cap, think about to the extent that you could go through your daily lives without a product or service from one of these two vendors, with Alphabet, obviously Google, and Android, Android and Apple with your smartphones. Obviously it is pervasive. And one of the things that is foundational to all this is it starts with you. So anytime that you are signing on to any kind of site through, let's say, a smartphone, they know that it's you because you're already logged in. If you go to any place and you're not logged in, immediately you're going to be hit up with sign in with Facebook, sign up. They want to know who you are, and by knowing who you are bringing a whole bunch of history that goes along with you in terms of where you've been before, the demographics. It is absolutely frightening to know how much they know, about you, are tracking you, and go on any website, go to Business Insider, you'll see 35 web trackers that will pop up that are kind of watching you, right? So the Borg, if you will, this collective intelligence of e-commerce, players that are doing all this, they're learning from you. So there's a reason why Alexa and Siri and Google Voice are all being, quote, almost given away, right? The device is almost given away because they want to be able to learn from you so they can better support you. So the AI is, quote, free, even though in procurement we know nothing is free. It's included in the value prop. So I know this might sound a bit, dystopian and kind of, Minority Report, but some of the key design pieces of this are important, and as you bring that over to the B2B side. So when someone signs on to a procurement system, whether you're a power buyer like a category manager or just a casual requisitioner, the system knows who you are. They know your role first and foremost, and then immediately can start to tailor the system to what it thinks you're going to be wanting to do. And as soon as you start interacting with the system, it should be able to make some predictions and understanding of what you are able, what you are trying to do. So you already have some of this that's already happening. So and now on the guided selling side, you have to be careful because in B2B, as soon as you, let's say, go and punch out to a supplier's website, you are now under the general controls of the seller who is free to upsell you to, hey, why don't you get some, Dale Earnhardt goggles, even though you came in for, safety gloves or whatever. Obviously you can manage that a little bit, but it's still an issue. So there are some of these dynamics that are out there, and and when you buy something through Amazon Business or through some of the big supplier networks that are out there, and I won't name names. Sometimes the supplier is paying sometimes a fairly hefty sum to participate, in that marketplace. But the point is that this some of the concepts are not necessarily a bad thing, like this AI and this learning aspect to it. So there are a lot of B2B considerations that have to be kind of dealt with before you bring all that kind of interesting stuff over. So this was a slide where I kind of overlaid some of the issues just from, let's say, a contract and commercial management standpoint to some of these issues. And so all these red call-outs are just some of the things that you have to be careful about, let's say, in terms of whether it's contingent labor liability when you use a gig worker and you bring them on site and something happens, to them. Whether it is IP risk, that you have out there through, let's say, some big, supplier network, or when a supplier signs onto one of those networks and says, oh, click here to accept those terms, they might not realize that, let's say, a lot of their intellectual property with buyer interactions may now be owned by the platform owner, or that the pricing that they're giving to their buyer that they thought was proprietary is now being served up in a giant price benchmarking service. So there's a lot of issues that you have to kind of, just be cognizant of. But this idea on the good side, the idea, let's say, of a fail-safe, compliant workflow. So on these e-commerce systems, they are guiding you down certain pathways, kind of buying pathways, selling pathways. So the idea of pathing people and pathing them based on your understanding of who they are and their role and what you're trying to get them to do is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it ultimately supports generally the outcome that they're trying to get to. And you don't want to overwhelm them with choices. That's kind of called the paradox of choice. You want to give them some choices, but you want to do it from a different context. So I'll let you read this quote. The notion of guided selling is really about how do I guide consumers through configurators and pathing to really guide them optimally, so to maximize the chance of selling them something, right? That's guided selling. That's obviously not what we want from a procurement standpoint, right? We want folks who can come in, if they've already bought things before, we can just give them what they, let them come in, get what they need, and get out without the upsells, without all the complexity, without, all that kind of complexity. Let the buyer get what they need from a corporate travel standpoint. Let them get their Uber. Let them, buy their, iPad holder, whatever it is. The idea is to let them come in, put in what they're looking for, and based on that, and based on what you type in, get guided to the preferred processes and P2P buying channels and paying channels. Whether, we won't get too much into it because actually Paul's has a demo on this. But based on all of this work that you've done around building approved, suppliers and category taxonomies and local inventories that we want to use out of the stock room and our punch outs, we want to bring all this together and make it seamless to that end user. So this idea is really around guided buying to support the procurement, what you want to do on a procurement standpoint to support those objectives. This was actually something that I wrote in a previous life back in 2005. And it's a long time ago, it's 12 years ago, but finally it is actually starting to happen, and it is here. And so I won't steal Paul's thunder, but I think it's great that we're finally starting to bring some of this stuff together to really, allow this to happen. Now, obviously there's just some basic things that you need to have in place, and so this was from a study we did on tail spend earlier this year on, hey, what are the basic things that you want, within the B2C experience that you'd like to bring over? And this was like 300 procurement professionals. And a lot of this is basic, stuff around self-service, right? Push it out to the requisitioners, let them track their own stuff. You don't need to call me for that, right? Same thing on the supplier side, right? Give the suppliers a supplier portal. When are they going to get paid? Push that stuff out, right? We don't want to get in the way. And also, let them be able to transparently see, in the tail spend example, maybe we want to go, maybe my corporate catalog isn't that great, and I want that end user to be able to get what they need, even though it's kind of more of a one-off item. Great. Punch out to Amazon Business. They know who you are. We've, selected some categories you can choose from. Get what you need, and then the settlement is seamless, however you want to do that, whether it's on terms or through basically, a P-card type, settlement. Terrific. Well, what else do we want? Well, guess what? We also want that experience to be better for our requisitioners. So in that, we want better searching, filtering, sorting, comparing, substituting, all that stuff that we like on Amazon and other platforms. Let's take the best of those things and bring that into the B2B context and understand who they are, what they can get access to, what they've searched for before, where are they, and really be able to make it really relevant, to them, but within this business context, right? So that is really what they're looking for. And if you think about all these B2C requirements that are all great, B2B is complex, right? There are things that you have to deal with. You have to deal with integration to all these other systems and master data. You have to deal with, analytics. You want to, you have things where some of your items you want to be able to NDA, have IP protection on some of these, particularly for the sellers who, want, it's really important to them. And the voice of the supplier is an important consideration, in this also. I won't go through all this list, and this is actually just the top ones. There's actually more, underneath this. But, the key is you've got to be able to manage that complexity, and this is where you want to be able to push as much of this as you can onto your solution providers that should have pre-integration to a lot of the back office systems, that are going to know how to connect out to suppliers very easily. There's a lot of things that your provider should be doing because they are serving you not just a procurement empty app that you just serve up, an application to push some workflows. You are looking them as a broader service provider to be an extension of you as a procurement organization, because a procurement organization is itself a service provider and, business partner, but in high impact service provider, but no less providing these supply management services to the business. And the good news is, and I know this is a bit of a swag, but when we asked the study respondents, we said, okay, if you do all these things that we said in the study around making it easier and, meeting these requirements, what's the impact that you can see? And there's a lot of demonstrable impact that you can have on adoption, cycle times, reducing maverick spending, all that. Now, obviously, these are just estimates, but it's just worth noting that, the procurement professionals think this is something that is really important. And I think it's just important to note that there is an analog here, right? So this in the core supply chain, in the physical supply chain, we've had this move from the model, the Model T Ford, if you will, of one size fits all, to, we have to kind of build everything into discrete, SKUs and end products where we're kind of guessing what the consumer is going to want, to then the supply chains have migrated to more of a configure to order environment. So, take something like the Mini where you can customize, the paint schemes and all that kind of stuff. But the flexibility was built into the physical manufacturing system. But now everything really moving to software, right? And so if you look at here, with Tesla, all of the physical controls basically moving to their Model 3, on just a single tablet, if you will, is the entire, the entire UI. So really software getting in there and modeling the complexity that is inherent in what you're trying to do, but then kind of abstracting away the complexity and only showing what that end user needs to see based on what they're trying to do. So this idea of mass customization products, you start to see now on the software side, where it is now too on the software side. We've moved from mainframe to client server to on-premise apps, to cloud apps, but cloud apps still being kind of almost taking the data model of the old apps and kind of still being relatively rigid, to now a new class of applications that are much more informed by the data itself. So let's take the example of regulatory data that we need to be able to comply with, right? Or customer-specific requirements that then get baked into our supplier management, requirements and workflows, such that we're only collecting the data that we need from a regular, certification standpoint, qualification standpoint, that we absolutely need. So what you're starting to see is applications that are being more intelligent by virtue of of this new type of capability. So what is what does that mean? Well, certainly from beyond the bits and bytes of this, what it allows you to do as a procurement organization is to now create much more easily these guided kind of processes. So we talked about guided buying, which is basically in a P2P context, end requisitioner having a need. But more and more there's guided sourcing and guided contracting. So you're wanting to put together a contract. All right, tell me about this. The contractor, are they coming on site? Yes or no? Yes. Are they touching IT resources? Yes. All right, based on that, we basically assemble the clauses from the clause library and serve up a contract ready to go. Nothing is non-standard. Legal doesn't even need to see it, or maybe they get copied on it, and then we push it into a digital signaturing app and get that signed. And by the way, if you are not doing digital signatures, that's just one of the easiest things to do, because chasing wet ink on a contract is just really, really stupid. There's absolutely no need to do it, and you can take easily 80% cycle time, 90% cycle time, just based on what I've seen a lot of companies do, just on that little process. So anyway, that's a little quick hit there. So hopefully you're doing that. But that notion of really guiding people down that path is really is what we're talking about. Now, obviously, you need to have a lot of things in place to do that. I won't get too much into all the plumbing there, but you probably have most of those things in place already. So the guided processes. You could also just tailor your broader operating model, right? In some cases, it might be someone in the business that does it. Sometimes it's someone in procurement. With the really flexible workflows that are out there, you can really allow a much more flexible operating model. And as you do that, guess what? Now you can tailor your services and your service offerings to those stakeholders. So when you're talking to marketing, they might want to do some more of those things themselves, or you might have someone that procurement that's embedded in marketing, or vice versa. And by the way, they don't like the word cost. They'd rather use the word investment, and they want to see that showing up on their screen. So you can tailor the functionality to them, but you can also tailor the metrics, to them. You can, tailor the terminology and the system behavior, based on them. So you can do that based on the stakeholder as well as the nature of the category. And on that side, this is where category-specific functionality really is a key determinant of how you can use this functionality. So category is not just some simple, UNSPSC taxonomy, commodity code that you just tag against a supplier. That is, not a very rich way to model, really what category management is all about, which is tailoring your processes and your strategies and your systems now to manage those categories based on the nature of the supply market and the suppliers themselves. And so that's really where technology is not just automating an old cow path, right? It's really bringing new techniques to bear. So their idea of combinatorial optimization in strategic sourcing and bid optimization, that enables scenario planning and you to unlock value by really opening up a market basket and telling suppliers, hey, cherry pick whatever the hell you want, and allows you to manage that complexity and unlock new sorts of value. So it's not just the technology, it's the techniques and the strategies that it can really help enable. And if you do that right, then you as a procurement organization really adopting this new class of technology and everything that goes with it in terms of the techniques and the strategies and the content that gets bundled into this, it allows you to become a much more powerful service provider that can offer this kind of some of these consumer-like capabilities to engage your stakeholders, make it really easy for them to use in an IKEA-like way or a QuickBooks way or an Amazon way, whatever. Pick your favorite style, and they all bring different little pieces to it. But you can also nudge them along and send them down the right path. So kind of freedom without choice, right? How do you make it so that you can serve up Uber or Airbnb within your corporate travel program, but still have the controls that you want? In fact, you'll even get more controls using, let's say, Uber on things like traveler protection and things like that than you did historically, right? So a lot of great things that you can do, and as you do that, a lean user interface and leaning that out. Value engineering the system means you're only going to present the information that they need to see. It's not, okay, here's 3,000, fields with 4 layers deep on an old blue screen that you have to kind of, figure out how to tab your way, through those fields. That's long. That should be long gone. Some of the folks out there might have some of this still. So that idea of bringing this outside-in set of best practices and content and putting it through a technology platform that can help then really manage that complexity but still offer up some of the simplification and the ease of use to the end user is really key. And, the more in which your provider is not just a tech provider but also works with third-party content providers and suppliers and really can kind of extend their platform to really elevate more, to go beyond the feature function, that's going to be great. And so at the end of the day, the system should basically behave differently depending on who you are and what you're trying to do. So your word of the day is polymorphism, and this comes from object-oriented programming. And what it means is the object that's being called will behave differently based upon who calls it. So your procurement system and you as a procurement organization should become polymorphistic. I don't know if that's actually a word, and I wouldn't encourage you to use it in your day-to-day discussions, but it means that you can basically personalize your experience to those, to your stakeholders. And if you do that, and if you learn from what others are out there, I'm going to get this over to Paul so you can get into that. You're really going to be able to rethink some of the approaches to how you implement solutions and select them, and your assumptions about what technology can or cannot do. Do not constrain the supply market. Let the supply market bring the innovation, and from that, match it up with your customers or your stakeholders, and really be a matchmaker between that innovation and what your stakeholders can get. Obviously, you want to be, commercially manage that well and get the best value from it, but ultimately that value is going to be based on those end stakeholders' outcomes. So as you do that, benchmark, but really ultimately raise your value prop. And as you do that, especially in the land of AI, you want to be able to stay ahead of the algorithm, because if you are not elevating your value prop and you are doing a highly repetitive task, you are at risk. So, that's my spooky little ominous foretelling before I turn things over to Paul. So, Paul, I'm going to let you kind of get into the trenches here and take it from here. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. It's a great pleasure to join Pierre and Sheena for this webinar today. I've been really interested in what Pierre's had to say on this subject for some time, and scribbling down some thoughts and notes of my own, actually, as you were just talking there, Pierre. There's some critical threads that run through what you've just said. And a lot of these are significant influences on how software is developing, and also how business is developing and human behavior is developing to create what is a completely different way of working in the future. We are on the cusp of something very exciting. And it seems appropriate, as we are conducting this webinar on October 31st, to at least make a passing reference to Halloween. This is not the place for procurement horror stories, but in thinking about the subject we were planning to discuss, it did occur to me that for many people who need to take advantage of what procurement has set up, so the purchasers, the requesters, the end users, finding what they need can be a bit like going trick-or-treating. What I mean by that is that in order to get the ideal result, the exact item or service that you need, the good candy, if you like, you have to go from house to house, perhaps to everyone in the neighborhood, until you find the good stuff. Now, some kids are smart and send out their younger siblings as a kind of advance party to report back where the full-size Snickers are. And so I guess that's really what we're looking for from our B2B software, from our procure-to-pay, from source-to-pay software. It's the idea of don't make me go hunting through catalogs and supplier to supplier. Just point me to the stuff that I need. Point me to the good stuff. So in planning and designing state-of-the-art procurement software, the developers need to ask a couple of questions. Do the users want to go from house to house in the hope of finding what they need? Or do they want to be taken straight to the good stuff? And it's not only for the end user buyers and the people that the sort of downstream, the casual end of this whole value chain. For procurement professionals, for the category managers and sourcing professionals, in the past they have had to go from house to house on source to pay street, stopping at each place on the way to complete a set of tasks. These stops are defined not in any kind of logical sense because they help the business or suit a process, but because that's where the technology tools have been. That's where the software tools are. You follow your process, and then you have to make a stop in order to plan your savings and plan the value that you want to get out of something. And then later on, perhaps, do a bit of sourcing, compose an RFI or whatever. And then some way down the road, do some purchasing, and maybe, if you're lucky, do a bit of supplier relationship management in some kind of software environment. Oh, by the way, anything relating to contracts, well, that's not even procurement's problem. That's down a side alley, and we don't want to go down there. So technology has been seen as nothing more than task-level activity deployed here and there to support an overarching process. In fact, at a conference earlier this year, a speaker that I heard said, I think of procurement software as being like a bag of golf clubs. I take out the one I need, I use it, I put it away again. But there's a problem with that point of view, and that problem is us. And Pierre, you touched on this very clearly. People, users, and however watertight and robust the procurement processes are on paper, the issue is that they don't occur on paper. The processes occur in the real world, and those people, those users, are the people who conduct the process. And today those processes are conducted almost exclusively in software. Even if that's just email and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets, software dominates. Far from being stops along the road, the software we use is the road. The conventional wisdom is that the most granular process that we can map out and we can get experts in to map out for us is somehow technology agnostic. But how can that truly be the case? If you define a 17-step process and your software doesn't allow you to easily conduct steps 14 to 16, then your process will not work. Gone are the days when people dip in and out of software for small tasks. The whole thing, the whole process, our whole daily routine happens in software. Our entire interaction with the world outside of line of sight is dominated by interface with technology. Whether we intended it to be that way or not, today virtually all of our interactions with the world are mediated through software. What this means is that the process you will actually follow will be the one that the software permits, regardless of how you defined it on paper. Now, the traditional approach to business engineering has these, of course, realms of people, process, and technology, and they remain relevant today as they have always been. And yet technology today completely encompasses both the people and the process, how they work and what they are able to do. Thus the software and the data systems we use can no longer be thought of as merely tactical tools. The software is the core of our business, and the outcomes are determined not by people, process, or technology, but by how effectively all three combine to create a single system. It is people using software that become the process. The software defines what that process can be. And because it is us, the users, who are determining the process, our expectations, our preferences, and our patience fundamentally affect the outcome. This is something that procurement, the software industry, actually, I'm bound to say this, the rest of the procurement software industry has not fully realized. That's in my contract, I have to say that. We conducted some research a little while ago into user expectations and behaviors, and we got one statistic shows it very clearly. Around 60% of our users consider themselves new to procurement, indeed new to the kind of business-to-business environment. There's a new cohort of younger people coming into our industry. And secondly, the other technologies that they interact with most are Facebook and Google. And of course, there are a whole load of other things that Pierre has already touched on that have impact here. This is meaningful because it means a huge percentage of the user base. Remember, these are the people who are now defining how effective the source-to-pay process actually is in our companies. They have no experience of complex business software, the business software of old. They see the world through the lens of their smartphone apps. And yet, when presented with some legacy text-based system, we nevertheless expect those users to be productive, compliant, and active in driving results. So that is not what happens in every case. Now, the question one might reasonably ask is, so what? Why do user opinions and consumer demands matter when it comes to considering business-to-business software systems? It is business after all. You're not at home, you're not there to have fun, you're there to work. Well, as I said, it is clear that the user and his or her opinions of preferences and enjoyment of the interface can have direct impact on the success of a procurement program. The expectations that a user has when presented with any kind of software will directly inform their assessment of its suitability. And let's be honest, whether they want to use it or not. This in turn is directly correlated with adoption of the software and use of the software. Again, let me be clear, implementing a state-of-the-art procurement platform is not about providing some nice-to-have tools that the business can use if they want to. Achieving strategic goals is entirely predicated on opportunity identification, planning, sourcing, compliance, performance management, and so on. And if your users are finding workarounds because they don't like the software, then this so-called solution that you've been sold is no solution at all. But get it right, and you drive return on investment very effectively indeed. The right user experience directly drives return on investment. At this point, I want to make clear that user experience is not just look and feel. Okay? It's not just the way that the software is colorful or contains graphics or whatever. It's more than even just ease of use. It is look and feel, of course it is ease of use, but it's also capability, functionality. It's got to be able to do what you need it to do as well. So user experience as a feature of business-to-business software has become increasingly important. We know that it encourages adoption, which becomes utilization. By competing with user expectations, it keeps users engaged and enthusiastic in what they're doing. These are factors which should not be underestimated if you're attempting some kind of transformation program. The users directly affect the outcome. Maintaining that engagement with your prescribed best practice and process will keep you on target with the strategy, and thus the procurement operation itself can have a substantial impact on the success of the business. And this is why your choice of business software matters, and why you require the best user experience to drive those results. But there are some challenges which face both software developers and procurement professionals alike. The first of these is what one might call the accidental complexity problem. Software developers love complexity. We love building stuff. Software companies love to sell features and whistles and bells, and by and large, as consumers, even as professionals, we like to buy that complexity, whether we use it or not. So if we examine complexity against functionality, then we can plot a graph of the cost of technology. That's the cost to develop it, to build it. It's the cost for you to buy it. It's also the cost to your organizations of having to learn it, make use of it, and drive the ROI from it. It's fairly typical that after a certain level of functionality is reached, the increase in complexity gets out of proportion to such an extent that we see a great increase in complexity and in cost and in difficulty of use and in learning curve without any significant increase in functionality. So you might call this if you like, the zone of pointless development. But it's also an area in which technology providers spend an awful lot of time developing, because we customers are told by the industry and by some analysts, present company excluded, that we should always be demanding just a little bit more, again, whether we use it or not. So when we look at business-to-business applications, we can see that a plot of functional complexity against desirability follows the same curve. We want more and more all the time because that's what we have been told technology is all about. But on the whole, if we plot ease of use against that complexity, quite the reverse is true. What we end up with is lightweight software systems that look great but don't do a whole lot, kind of like the app approach to doing things. And then there's heavyweight, over-engineered systems, ERPs, bespoke systems that can do a whole lot for every possible permutation of operation, but are a nightmare to use. I guess in the center we have an area of tolerance where some business software lives that is not necessarily that easy to use and does some of what the users need, a kind of acceptable mean, or rather a not very acceptable mean, just a tolerated mean. But where we really want to be is here, where software is a joy to use, a delight to use, and does everything we need it to. Today, the business-to-business applications in the marketplace tend to fall into this kind of grey-green area, with the focus mainly on functionality and complexity. So the challenge for the industry is to deliver both advanced functionality and simplicity in a single package, suitable for everyone from the occasional buyer to the strategic sourcing expert. But that's a view that is often criticized as heretical. And I don't use that word lightly. Here are two pieces of conventional wisdom that have been personally imparted to me by industry experts. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but the first says, don't make the software too easy to use, because then anyone can come and do the job. Experienced people should have that experience honored. That was actually advice given to us by an analyst. Don't make your software too easy to use. It's a staggering thought. The other quote here is, procurement and purchasing are different functions, conducted by different groups of people. Therefore, it stands to reason that they need to use different software. These are extraordinary positions to take in this decade. For one thing, is it really the case that an experienced procurement professional's value to their employer is their ability to use badly designed software? Are the results of sourcing events and procurement programs purely mechanistic, such that anyone can do the job as long as they know the system? Surely that's nonsense. And also, is it so unthinkable that a single software product might behave differently depending on what you need to do, and indeed who you are? Honestly, we put men on the moon 50 years ago, and we don't think we can build software that does what you need it to do in different circumstances? This is what Pierre was referring to as polymorphism. You want your software to act like the military-grade sourcing tools that you need if you are a sourcing professional, but if you just need to buy yourself a chair or order some professional services, you don't need to go through all that complexity. But why do you need to then make that happen in different areas, different pieces of software? We think there is a solution to both of these problems, and so I'll quickly describe it. Let's take a look at a straightforward source-to-pay process. In simple terms, that begins with looking for opportunities by looking at spend history and spend patterns to reveal those opportunities for savings and value. And then what we do is then take the next step and develop a plan and strategy to deliver that value according to the opportunities that we have identified, and then we need to do something about it. So typically that involves some kind of sourcing event, an RFP or an auction or a whole series of the same. And what those activities are intended to do is to establish the vehicle for value, the capacity to deliver those results, and that is what we refer to as a contract. With the contracts in place, the value set up during the negotiation can be exploited. So the relationship with the supplier must be managed so that the contract terms are complied with, and so that the pricing and delivery and service are all within the planned limits. But also that means that the value results from when the contracts are used. And it is only here that the savings, the value that you have set up through the whole of that source to contract process are actually realized. The rest of the process has been about creating the potential for savings, the potential for value, and it's here at the end of the process where that potential becomes reality. But there's an issue. This process can break down. Of course, it can break down at any point if you fail to plan, or you make your plans but you fail to act on them, you run your RFIs but never make any decisions to change your suppliers. It will fail, but assuming that you know how to do procurement, then you can get the contract readily enough prepared, but failing to manage the supplier correctly, more importantly, failing to actually use the contract, are the most common reasons why savings are not realized. The potential cannot be actualized if all the hard work your people put into creating the vehicles for value is never exploited. But what is typically done when companies consider implementing software to support this process is something along these lines. The idea that we have a separate tool for each separate function. Maybe invest very heavily in some advanced spend analysis and then do all your planning in Excel. And then maybe use some kind of standalone sourcing system to execute the sourcing. But then, of course, as we said earlier, contracts, that happens down a blind alley somewhere else. There are other people involved. That's all done in Word and SharePoint because that's all the attorneys understand. And it becomes disconnected. Procurement's natural territory from source to contract could be under control, but procurement professionals can pretty much get by with that, but lose out when the contract needs to be exploited. This kind of approach to how we deploy technology, how we use technology, exacerbates that division between the procurement will and the rest of the company, the rest of the organization. And it's not because one piece of software is missing a feature. It's because the technology itself perpetuates the fundamental breakdown in the source-to-pay process. And yet, here is that conventional wisdom from the software industry. Procurement as a function is different to purchasing. We have different groups of people. We have procurement professionals, power users, they're doing strategic things, they need complexity. And yet the company, they just want to buy stuff, they need to call off items from inventory, they need to purchase what they need to purchase, they don't need any kind of complexity. But this division, based on the notion that you have to have different software because there are different requirements and different audiences, different users, that is what creates the divide, the brick wall, if you like, that prevents the value getting delivered. You then have to manhandle the intent set up in the contract over into the purchasing system, not just in terms of data, but in terms of communication of the very existence of the contract. In order to map and to understand and report on whether you are getting utilization and compliance, you have to do a whole load of work back in the other direction. And so we have a notion that if you unify the software around the contract, then what you can do is set up a much better process to deliver savings and deliver the results. The core innovations in this space are not new features and functions and whistles and bells, which we're never going to use. And that's the normal approach. That's the de facto position for software. The real innovations in this space, the transformation driver, if you like, is the removal of the unnecessary barrier to the flow of information and the flow of value. Suddenly it's so much easier to drive value out of hard negotiated contracts to turn potential into realized savings because the software has allowed you to join up and the whole user base is able to join in. So this is our idea of a single unified workspace with simplicity for some, complex processes for others, but ease of use and an engaging experience for all. And that can become the collaboration space for all of the actors in the supply chain, including, of course, the suppliers, without whom there is nothing. So I'd like to show you a couple of examples of how the combination of a unified procurement workspace and an enhanced user experience can deliver new types of efficiency in procurement. And this goes back to what Pierre was saying earlier about the idea of a guided buying system. The first example, instead of being presented with menus and catalogs, the user has a simple search bar and they're able to say what they need. We need to fix a water leak. And with no need to search for a contractor or a service provider, the system will use natural language recognition and machine learning to point us directly to the contract we can use for this purpose. This can be done with a type search or a voice interface, but either way, the contract for the service is directly connected to the end user looking for that service. This is how you maximize contract utilization. But along with the contract, the user can access policies and even details of colleagues who can advise and support. And yet all they have done is search for something that they need. This reduces unplanned off-contract spend, provides full traceability of contract usage, and does all of that whilst being incredibly simple from a user perspective. In another example, I'll just click through into the next one. We might search for an item that is either available for purchase or held in stock. So we'll search in this case for helical gears. And it can easily illustrate how you can manage an ad hoc request for something that's in inventory and perhaps that data of which is held in another system entirely. The underlying AI-based programming lets the system understand the request and indicates that there are matching items for purchase or from inventory, and the user can decide, perhaps according to their role and their privileges, to call off a stock item or purchase a new, or they may be guided to the only option that they're permitted to conduct. Perhaps simply they might want to view all of the matching items available as if they were shopping on a consumer website and see all the details, the prices, the available inventory status of all the components, their available budget that's remaining. And why not? To make the final fully informed decision as to which item or service they want to acquire, they might make the choice to compare a selection of items and review the complete range of variables and data associated with each. This is exactly the kind of user experience in behavior with which we're all familiar. It's everyday to us. So why shouldn't our corporate purchasing systems not be as easy and intuitive? Again, that conventional wisdom says that consumer-like experience and contract compliance are mutually exclusive. But we know that that's nonsense. So this is our vision then of procurement software's future. Let's get back to that. The users, whoever they are, whatever their role, will be able to work together in a unified workspace that gives them a natural and intuitive experience and gets them rapidly and easily to the results that they need. Not just something they want to buy, but a process that they want to conduct, a contract they need to negotiate, a sourcing program that they want to execute on. Procurement professionals can identify where the good candy is without having to go from house to house. The buyers can get to the good candy straight away by being shown to where it is, and the suppliers can get maximum take-up of the candy that they are offering under the agreed contracts. It's treats for all, everybody, and there's no tricks. Thank you very much for your attention so far. Very keen to hear if we have any questions from the audience. Pierre?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That was great. I mean, I was scribbling a bunch of stuff down too as well, and I think it's great. A couple of learnings for me. One is use lots of multimedia, adopt a really great British accent, and also know what the hell you're talking about. But I think the other thing was, I think it was one of the kind of common threads I was hearing, other than this reduction of complexity and really thinking more, about what the software can do and challenge some of the old assumptions, is this idea of feedback, and learning. And I guess as procurement professionals are trying to, improve their leadership skills and move up through the organization, whatnot. And one of those, and probably the biggest skill they talk about in leadership is empathy, right? And the whole thing about empathy is understanding, is getting feedback from others about kind of, where they are and whether something's working or not. And it was just so many different levels. I mean, just the fact that like all this machine learning and AI stuff is basically all about feedback. The thing about the tribal knowledge with Halloween. Yeah, my kids, now that, a couple of them are teenagers, they don't know just the right houses. They go to a totally different neighborhood in our town, which is very, the upper side of the tracks, which is a very target-rich environment. But there's also just some things around like as sourcing professionals and looking at Maverick spend as an opportunity, right? And looking at spend visibility and saying, well, why were people going around the process? Well, maybe they got a better deal because our old deal was just too old and it's time for a refresh, or they just didn't know how to get on the system. They didn't read the policy manual that was 30 pages long, or it was just easier to use a P card, and find another channel to go, or there was no bailout option if I couldn't find the thing I was looking for. Procurement didn't tell me who to call, or there was no managed service provider that they served up to that could kind of help me with this stuff. And let's say the tail spend example. So I think every the procurement can kind of get that kind of feedback in a lot of ways, and the tool can really help with that. But there's also just things that you can do with customer sat surveys, or just basically just getting that voice of the customer and having internal advisory boards, or in your planning processes, annual planning processes. So I guess my question, and there are a couple of questions coming in from the audience, just my first one to you, my really only question to you, Paul, is you guys offer managed services and not just technology services, and you must get lots of feedback from from customer advisory boards, from your smart engineers that are finding cool stuff out there, from your MSP clients that are using you, and from the folks in your MSP organization that are actually doing it, getting their feedback. What any kind of just interesting learnings about how do you get that feedback and make a decision on how to what you actually then go put into the software, and get back to the folks and play that feedback back. So I know it's kind of a broad question, and I told you I was just going to surprise you with whatever, so that's what popped into my head.
Well, it is Halloween, yeah. No, I mean it's a very good question. Would I like to say that all of that insight into how things are going to be in the future is unique to GP? I would like to say that. Of course, it's not true. We are, as any forward-thinking technology organization should be, we are guided as much by what our customers are wanting to achieve as we are by our own insights and innovations into what technology can do. I think it's fair to say that over the last couple of years, we've seen a significant change in what our customers are looking for. We have, this is no sales pitch, but we have 3 lines of business. We do procurement consulting, we do procurement services, and we do procurement software. And without wishing to disclose anything too much, it has been true that in the past that those have been 3 different kind of businesses for us. With broadly different organizations as our customers in each, because of the position that they occupy on a certain maturity curve. But now we're seeing a significant number of very large organizations looking for genuinely a solution. And I'm not using that as a euphemism for a software product. They're looking for some kind of transformative means to drive new types of value out of procurement and supply chain activity. And colloquially, they're saying to us, don't talk to us about services or consulting, strategy, or indeed about software. Talk to us about value. How do we actually do all of this? And those most forward-thinking of organizations are saying to us, our users have to have something that works as well. The idea of central diktats has gone. The idea of compliance being driven by robust, unbreakable processes has gone, because that has been proved to be ineffective, particularly at a time where the end users do have alternatives. The alternative is to pick up your phone and order something off Amazon and to claim it on expenses. And that happens millions of times every year because the in-house processes for order processing and order approval are too long and too onerous to deliver the value that the end user needs. So what we're seeing is a push from our customers to say, give us a system that everyone can use, that gives us visibility, that gives us the connectivity that we need, that allows us to drive value in a compliant way, and that doesn't encourage people to go off-piste and to go to other systems. And then the pull side of it is the kind of work that we're doing with some of the advanced technologies and some of the innovative side, which is going to take some time to come to the fore, that allows us to say, well, what if? We're already at a position now, as you've seen, where you can use natural language either by typing or by using a voice interface that will then guide you to where you need to go, or indeed trigger a specific action within the software. And we're going to take that to the next level. The whole industry has to take that to the next level to emulate what is happening across some of those brands that you saw in the early slide, really taking advantage of artificial intelligence and automation, not to replace human beings from the procurement and value delivery process, far from it. It is not about honoring the expertise of people by giving them complex tools that no one else can use, making them the high priests, if you like, of procurement. It's about freeing up the human ingenuity and innovation from having to work with clunky tools to look for new sources of value, new types of relationships with suppliers, new ways of building resilience and return in for the company. Long-winded question, long-winded answer.
Yeah, it was really great. No, and I like your last point, right? You know, we don't want to just give people a better buggy whip, right? You know, as we go through these inflection points. I mean, we're really at the top of the hour. I mean, there was one question here around, you know, should there be individual privacy concerns like we expect as personal consumers? You know, there is definitely some regulations that are happening around GDPR in Europe, and you know, there is some of that, but honestly, I mean, I think when employees are signing up for, you know, a company, there is a compact, you know, that is signed, like, you know, when you are using a laptop, that is company information, and really the interactions that you have, you know, are really, you know, belong to the company. I mean, yeah, you are also a consumer as such, but in that business context, really, the interactions, I think, are really owned by the company. I mean, I think there are IP concerns around when you work with your providers to make sure, and with your suppliers, making sure that you're protecting your intellectual property in this kind of cloud environment, and really working that through with your provider and with your suppliers and with your provider. But that's a whole separate thing. But I don't think it's a huge thing. But Paul, maybe if you want to.
No, I think the very short answer to that is that the software will not only who you are, but in what context you are operating. So even if you may end up in the future having the same interface with the cloud, regardless of what you want to buy, whether it's coffee for your home or 10,000 laptops for your company, the system will know under which token you're operating and protect your data appropriately, parse your data appropriately according to those circumstances.
Yes, and we'll have a secure blockchain ready by that point as well, right? So that'll all be working seamlessly. So with that,
indeed,
we'll pass this over to Sheena. But I just want to thank Paul. Thanks so much for the presentation. It was great. I really learned a lot from it personally.
So thank you for the opportunities. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Pierre, I think you officially hit all of the popular buzzwords these days: blockchain, machine learning, RPA, and artificial intelligence. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. I had to pick off those last few boxes. Thanks for RPA. You get credit for that one. So
okay, great. All right. With that, everyone, thank you so much for attending. You'll see here on the screen Pierre and Paul's email addresses. We love interacting with you. Please send us any questions, comments, thoughts. Please send them our way. And if we did not get to your question today, check back on Spend Matters next week. We'll be sure to write up a post and feature this. You will also receive an on-demand version of this webcast within the next 24 hours. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you on the next event.